Well, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you. Thank you for coming at what has been, by necessity, a short notice. I don't think you need a great introduction from me about the significance of the discussion. We just had a NATO summit, which I was lucky to take part on the margins of, and to see in action a lot of the discussion that took place there. Now, as always, these summits are a bit of a sort of diplomatic theater. A lot of the discussion takes place before, a lot of the decisions are taken before. Nevertheless, I think it is true to say, and there's always a sort of a claim that there were historic summits, regardless of how historic, by definition, quite. But I think it's fair to say that this was, from my perspective, a very different kind of summit. I mean, it was palpable to me that, for instance, the new member states became real equal member states. For once, the discussion was about their security, and that discussion was the majority of the time at the summit. And it was much more a discussion that perhaps to some was irritatingly in area rather than out of area, much more about the security of our North Atlantic alliance and the challenges facing it, rather than some of the more theoretical discussions we used to have immediately after the end of the Cold War. Now, whether it's good or bad, it's up to you to decide, but I think you would agree with me that it's very timely to have our permanent representative, Sir Adam Thompson, with us this morning to outline his perceptions and the government's perceptions about how the summit went and the challenges that still face the alliance. Sir Adam has an enormously long experience, not merely in terms of NATO, but in terms of security questions. He was lucky or unlucky to have some of the most security-sensitive posts in the Foreign Office, and he had the advantage of seeing British security concerns, both from an Asian perspective and a more global one, as well as the one of the North Atlantic Alliance. As per usual rules of the game, Sir Adam will speak for about 15 minutes or so, and the presentation is on the record. The Q&A that follows thereafter, in which I encourage you to take part, will be off the record. Sir Adam.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much indeed for the opportunity of a platform here at RUSI, which feels like home, and it's good to be back. Thank you all for being here. I realize this has been arranged at relatively short notice. I wanted to talk a bit about the Warsaw Summit and what was decided there, but also in equal measure about where NATO goes from here, and perhaps a little bit about why this matters. Let me first of all start with Warsaw, and my main message here is just how much has been done. If you look back to 2013, what now seems rather like sunlit uplands, even though we were, as an alliance, heavily engaged in Afghanistan, the distance traveled to Warsaw, July 2016, is immense. The events of 2014, both Crimea and Mosul, have changed NATO's work from top to bottom and side to side. I can't think of an area of NATO work that has not been touched by those developments. The summit in September 2014 in Wales was a NATO immediate response to these challenges, but Warsaw really represented the first shot at a considered NATO response. And it covered virtually every area of alliance business. I'm going to simplify it into three general areas, but I will skirt over the detail very fast. Protecting our people, as Jonathan has said, the core responsibility of the alliance, defending NATO members. And Warsaw addressed this right across the deterrence and defense spectrum, from decision-making and national resilience through cyber defense and conventional military posture in the northeast of the alliance, all the way to nuclear. I will be happy to unpack some of the detail in Q&A. Very importantly, Warsaw marked the first steps to implement the modern concept of deterrence that NATO defense ministers had agreed in February. And so there's a lot of talk that you will have seen in the media about enhanced forward presence, particularly in northeast Europe, but also in the southeast. A Back to the Future version of deterrence, totally unlike the Cold War, but drawing on some Cold War lessons. Warsaw also, importantly, in addition to starting to put in place a modern deterrence set of arrangements, addressed dialogue with Russia and said that NATO looks for periodic, focused and meaningful dialogue with Russia. And that was reflected in the NATO-Russia Council meeting that followed the week after the summit. A second area that the summit squared up to was what Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, calls projecting stability. And from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to the Aegean to the central Mediterranean, leaders took decisions about NATO engagement. Very importantly on Afghanistan, I think the alliance turned a corner and is demonstrating credibly its commitment to go the distance in building up Afghanistan's forces and governance to a point where they can look after themselves. On Iraq, NATO has decided, with the invitation of the Iraqi government, to restart training and capacity building in country. In the central Mediterranean, NATO is looking to partner the European Union in the tasks that the EU is looking to give Operation Sophia. And a third area for the summit could be loosely called partnership. Not much heralded, but Montenegro was a 29th seat at the summit table as an observer in anticipation of becoming NATO's 29th full member. The summit addressed NATO's neighborhood with meetings of the NATO-Ukraine Commission and the NATO-Georgia Commission. And above all, it addressed the NATO-EU relationship, not actually at the summit, but at Warsaw. Jens Stoltenberg and Tusk and Juncker signed a joint EU-NATO declaration on better working of these two institutions together, a reflection of the realization since 2014 that it isn't possible for any one institution in Europe to do Europe's security. You absolutely have to have collaboration, above all, between NATO and the EU. And the NATO Transatlantic Security Declaration from leaders recognized collaboration with the European Union as increasingly essential. I want to turn to what comes next on the NATO agenda. This is concentrating my mind and that of my delegation a good bit now, because we are realizing that what Warsaw gave us to do between now and the Brussels 2017 summit is probably more work than we can actually handle. And we're going to have to think quite carefully about sequencing and prioritization of work. But let me sketch a few areas on our minds. First, of course, we've got to go on implementing what NATO has already decided. So the Wales decisions, although largely implemented, there is still more work to do on the Wales 2014 Readiness Action Plan. And we've got to implement everything that leaders decided at Warsaw. That's fundamental for NATO's credibility. It needs to be seen to do what it says it will do. But there are real challenges, as I've said, for bandwidth, both for the UK delegation, which is only the 10th largest at NATO in terms of staffing, and for the NATO organization as a whole. But I think one of the important things about Warsaw was that it not only addressed in a considered way what challenges have been presented since 2014, but laid the foundations for being able to move onto the front foot, to look forward a bit more, and to start shaping security in Europe once again. And there are a series of interlocking pieces of business to be done. The first is the collective defense task, looking forward not just to the Brussels 2017 summit or 2018 summit as is currently envisaged, or possibly a 2019 summit for the 70th anniversary of the alliance, but out a bit further to think about how we do collective defense in Europe in the 21st century. Part of this is about having enough strength. So leaders at Warsaw recommitted to the Wales Defence Investment Pledge, the 2% spend and 20% of your defence budget on military hardware. Part of it is about other aspects of transatlantic burden sharing. A lot of it is about capabilities. Collective defence also means putting in place, and this is going to take quite a few years, the full expression of the modern deterrence approach that the alliance is now embracing. Light forward presence and an ability to reinforce quickly. In the immediate, addressing the logistics and practicalities of rapid reinforcement is going to be high on the agenda. And another essential part of collective defense is working out how you relate to potential adversaries. It's Russia, but it can be others as well. It certainly involves dialogue and addressing the instabilities in the relationship, transparency, risk reduction, good reading of the other, good situational awareness. We have more to do as an alliance on projecting stability in NATO's and the European Union's neighborhood. This is an undeveloped agenda so far, and we need to work out how NATO adds real value on capacity building, for example, how it needs to adapt itself looking southwards to deal with non-state actors, what in fact the narrative for the alliance is about the way it works facing southwards. And just two more areas. One is partnership. Above all, as I've said, NATO and the European Union, where we face important choices in the next few weeks and months as to whether we see the two institutions go forward to address the security challenges they both share, or in the wake of the UK's referendum, we default unhappily to increased institutional competition. I fervently hope it will be the former, a real growing sense of collaboration. There are other areas, though, of partnership that should also be looked at. It's very hard to imagine NATO now conducting most of its operations, apart from collective defense, except in partnership with others. And we need to make partnership more the way that NATO works in the coming decade. And finally, a subject close to HMG's heart, we work quite hard to persuade allies not only that the alliance needs to adapt, but that it needs to become more adaptable by design, because although we are now, I think, quite successfully responding to the unexpected challenges thrown up by 2014, who knows what is just over the horizon that the alliance will once again have to adapt to. I think this is a really important agenda. You'd kind of expect me to say that, given the job I hold. But I do genuinely see Europe's security eroding at the moment. An unstable Russia, terrorism that is destabilizing, centrifugal populism, a mixed picture in the Balkans. If my neighbor is unstable, I am less secure. And it is hard to imagine the United Kingdom addressing any of those challenges without its allies and its partners, whether it is sea lines in the North Atlantic or the risk of massive cyber attack or resumed conflict in the Balkans or whatever. NATO provides a really fundamental framework and set of foundations for dealing with these challenges. It provides interoperability, command and control, legal frameworks, a political structure that is well tested for difficult dialogue, and as we've seen in Afghanistan, real capacity for the long haul. So we're about important work. I will stop there.
Thank you so much.